Welcome to Bible Study, Utica City Church. We are in Genesis chapter 49, and we're going to be beginning with verse 13. So I finished this chapter today. I only had a few verses left to go, but I finished it today. And going over all of these guys, and it says down in verse 28, it says, "All these are the 12 tribes of Israel. This is what their father said to them as he blessed them, blessing each one with the blessing suitable to him." And I thought to myself, man, I want to look up the word blessing, because Levi, Simeon, and Reuben, the first three, what they got was not a blessing. But the word in the Hebrew is blessing, and that's what it is. And so I just found that interesting, And so it causes you, it's like clearly the blessing that's on those three guys is no blessing. So the term blessing being applied to them must have a greater application, because God does not contradict himself and God does not make mistakes. So if you look at it through the lens of Jesus Christ, then every single thing, every single one of these guys did that caused their tribes to be blessed or cursed, all led to the establishment of Israel, the line of Judah, and Jesus Christ being born specifically from the line of Judah, the tribe of Judah. So really, although clearly it's not a blessing personally for these guys, or even really necessarily for their tribes, in the greater scheme of the revealing of Messiah, it's a blessing. Amen? Amen. So why don't we open up in prayer? Father God, we praise your holy name, Lord. God, thank you for your grace. Thank you, Lord, that despite the fallen world we live in, despite the aging bodies of sin that we still occupy, despite the downs of life, we have a joy in you, Jesus, because of what you have wrought on our behalf. That we know that no matter what comes, I have something and we have something to look forward to in eternity that is beyond our wildest expectations. And that you did it, and you did it all for us, Lord. And so in the midst of struggles, in the midst of pain, in the midst of a bad report, I still have a hope that we firmly hold on to, Lord. And that is the entrance into the full inheritance you have promised us for all of eternity, Lord God. And so here we are, studying your word, reading your word, expounding your word, that we might have a deeper understanding of who you are, Lord, and of your Messiah, Jesus Christ. We love you. We ask you to be the teacher tonight, Lord, through my mind, my lips, and that we would grow in grace and give you glory. In the name of Jesus, amen. Amen. Praise God. Genesis chapter 49, starting at verse 13. So where we left off was last week we talked only about Judah. That's verses 8 through 12. And the week before that we spoke only about Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and we just began to touch on Judah. So I started saying, and I kind of went off on a tangent, but I started saying that I saw these words really fell into three categories. The first category is the first three brothers, and it really wasn't a blessing. It was more of a curse on them, as far as they're going to pay a price for their sin, all right? And we went over that 2 weeks ago. Then you have Judah and you have Joseph. And their testimonies, as we'll see with Joseph tonight, and we saw last week with Judah, are very positive and just amazing words of blessing that are spoken over both these two tribes. More so for Judah than for Joseph, but still very much a blessing for both of them. And then you have another group, which is the remaining brothers, including Benjamin, that the words spoken over them aren't bad. They're just limited. All right? And I tried to word it, and then I just ended up nuking it because I could not word it correctly. But I'll try to state it again now. The first three brothers, clearly there were negative consequences for their actions, and so their blessings, quote unquote, were not going to manifest as blessings in their lives per se. All right? For the rest of the brothers, minus Judah and Joseph, their blessing is really just a temporal blessing on their tribe. Good things are going to happen, but it never extends beyond that into something greater regarding the revealing of Messiah. Whereas with Joseph and Judah, the blessing goes just beyond, hey, you're going to have a lot of food, you're going to make delicacies. That's what some of these blessings are, and you're going to see them tonight. And greater things are going to happen through you, right? So that's what I saw as these three categories. So as we enter into that reading tonight of the rest of these brothers, we already went over the three with the negative connotations: Reuben, Simeon, Levi. We already went over Judah, and now we're going to continue. If I can find the verse. Okay. 13. Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. Not bad, right? Pretty good. Things aren't going to be so tough, but that's it. Got nothing to do with Messiah, nothing to do with ruling and reigning, nothing to do with conquering the enemies, nothing like that. And this theme continues on. Verse 14. Issachar is a strong donkey crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that a resting place was good and that the land was pleasant, so he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant at forced labor. All right? Now, that's it's 2 verses, and things are good. But then at the end, you have this little attachment that it had a negative effect. Now, we're going to get into this when we actually get to the verse and I expound on it. Verse 16. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels so that his rider falls backward. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. So putting those 3 verses together, I did not take this as a negative. It's just taken to mean what kind of people these will be and their effect on others when they come against them. Whether they come against them or they come against the tribe itself, okay? Now we move on to Gad in verse 19. Raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. Again, it's neither good nor bad. All right, Gad will survive. He'll survive raids. He'll live to fight another day, is what it's basically saying, right? They may think they have victory, but in the end, they will be attacked because they attacked Gad. All right? It's like, you better kill Gad, because if you don't, they're going to come against you, Verse 20. Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. Clearly, this is an agricultural people who like to bake. I'm being facetious, but it's kind of all about food for these guys. They're going to have prosperity, all right? But it's a very limited blessing, isn't it? I mean, if I said to you, I got good news and I got bad news. You're going to have money and wealth and food, and you're going to travel, and then when you die, you're going to go to hell. Not so good, if you're a believer anyway. All right. Verse 21. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. Beautiful, but limited. All right? And then we get to Joseph. Now listen to the different tone of Joseph's word. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. The archers bitterly attacked him, shot at him, and harassed him severely. Yet his bow remained unmoved. His arms were made agile by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. By the God of your father who will help you. by the Almighty, who will bless you with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that crouches beneath, blessings of the breasts of the womb. The blessings of your father are mighty beyond the blessings of my parents, up to the bounties of the everlasting hills. May they be on the head of Joseph and on the brow of him who is set apart from his brothers. Now that's a word. Even if Messiah isn't born of the line of Joseph, there clearly is implications of, to me, this points back to the story of Joseph. It points back to all the Christ typology we saw of Joseph, that there are aspects of the Christ in Joseph and in his tribe, even if Christ is born of the tribe of Judah. That's what I see from this, all right? Clearly extends beyond, you guys are going to bake good food, or you're going to be a haven for ships, which is interesting because that particular tribe isn't on the seacoast. Oh wait, maybe that tribe is. Anyway, we'll get to it. There's a confusion there, but we'll get to it. And then finally in verse 27, we have Benjamin. Benjamin is a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at evening dividing the spoil. Now, we might automatically associate that as a negative because, in New Testament economy, we hear the word wolf, and we apply it to a negative connotation. I don't think that's the implication here. I think really what it's talking about is the warlike stance of this tribe as a whole in their character. Now, that's a good thing, and it's a bad thing. And we'll see that because, in Deuteronomy, Moses says some really great words about Benjamin. But then in Judges, Benjamin does arguably one of the most heinous acts in the whole Old Testament, the men of Benjamin. So much so that in chapter 20 of Judges, Israel declares war on Benjamin because of what they did. All right, and we'll get to that also. But remember, through this all, good cursings, mediocre, not that exciting, good, but and then the awesome blessings. Remember, every single one of these guys are born again. They're the patriarchs. They are men of faith. All right? So even though Reuben, Simeon, and Levi, and you'll see later on Benjamin, they make some poor choices, the people of these tribes. I mean, the heads themselves did. Benjamin didn't, but the other brothers did. They made some bad choices. But none of that impacted their eternal security. And that should be a lesson for us. Again, not so that you can go out and sin, not so that you can continue in your behavior that clearly runs against the Word of God, because that will not be good for you in this life. That's the thing about sin. Your sin as a believer. Now, I'm taking the attitude of a believer here, where when I sin, I regret it. Not, hey, I have grace, I can go and sin, praise Jesus. I think there's something fundamentally wrong there with the professing believer that says that causes me to really question their faith, if it's real, if it's saving faith. But the truth of the matter remains, and we're talking about this in Romans now, that your body has to die. If you think for a minute you're going to stop sinning for the rest of your life, at some point in your life here on earth, you're mistaken. If you gauge your morale as a Christian on your performance, all you're saying is that, you aren't worthy and you're really just going back to works. Well, if I only did better. God knew you wouldn't do better. Sure, you should aspire to better. Sure, we're called to cease from sin. But that does not, your performance does not change your status as a believer in Jesus Christ, if you're really a believer in Jesus Christ. All right, and a believer in Jesus Christ will not relish sin, will not embrace sin, and then call on the grace of God to save them. All right, as we learn, as we grow, as the Lord reveals to us that thing or things in our lives which are contrary to Him and His Word, we desire, if we're really believers, to fight the good fight of faith, to put them down. You may or you may not. It doesn't make you the enemy of God. It does not make you the enemy of God. Amen. Okay, so that's the rest of that section. The last section is 28 to 33, and that's just covering the death of Jacob. So I'm going to do that in a different unit of time. So let's begin with verse 13 on Zebulun. Go back up. Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. So for the first time in Genesis 49, Genesis 49 departs from the order of birth. All right? Up until this point, it's been in the order. You've had Reuben first, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. Everything's cool. It's in the exact order they're born, and all of a sudden, no more. Going outside the order. And I think this is because of the groupings that I was telling you about. All right? So if it had been in that sequence of the birth, then the next son to be addressed would be either Dan, the first son of Bilhah, or Issachar, the fifth son of Leah. Zebulun is the 10th son overall, and the 6th and last son by Leah. Issachar was born before Zebulun. No big deal, all right? The only other place where Zebulun precedes Issachar is in the blessings of Moses, which I already referred to in Deuteronomy chapter 33. If I had more time, I actually would have, because in Deuteronomy 33, Moses is dying. And he does the same thing Jacob's doing here. And that would have been a cool kind of comparison study to see how Jacob, what he had to say for each tribe, compared to seeing what Moses had to say about each tribe. Maybe I'll do that this week, and that'll be our study next week. I'll see if it's fruitful, but interesting thing to do. Thus, the birth order in Genesis 49, unlike the birth order given in Genesis 29 and 30, which is the actual birth order, starts with Jacob's blessings on all 6 sons by Leah, from Reuben to Zebulun. So that's what we're seeing here, is the order based on the mother, okay? The territory of Zebulun did not actually touch the coast of the Mediterranean. Right? Zebulun shall dwell at the shore of the sea. He shall become a haven for ships, and his border shall be at Sidon. So I'm like, huh? So now I'm looking at maps. I'm going, ancient Israel, you know. And lo and behold, Zebulun does not border the sea. It's really weird. Nor did it border on Sidon. The wording places it in close proximity. In other words, next door to both the sea and to Sidon. The tribe was situated to benefit from the important trade routes via the Via Maris, it was called, that ran right through Zebulun. And it was traversed by sea traders moving through her territory. All right, so to paraphrase verse 13, I could say, Zebulun shall dwell in close proximity to the shore of the sea, and he shall become a haven for the sailors of the ships who will pass through on their way to Canaan. All right? So basically what it's saying about Zebulun is that they'll prosper because they're on a major trade route. All right? Next guy, Issachar. Oh, now I wanted to see one thing. Did I not look it up? Zebulun. No, I did not. Let me just do this real fast. Zebulun means a dwelling and habitation. All right, now isn't that interesting? Zebulun's name means dwelling and habitation, and what's his word say for him in verse 13? Zebulun shall dwell. That his dwelling and habitation will be in a position of prosperity because of where they're physically situated in the promised land. Pretty cool. All right. See, I find this stuff interesting because, you know, did Jacob go, was he sitting down? This reminds me of The Chosen. If you ever watch The Chosen, Jesus, when he's going to make the Sermon on the Mount, there's a scene between him and John the Baptist, right? And Jesus is at the Sea of Galilee, and he's all upset, and he's really struggling because he's trying to come up with a sermon for the Sermon on the Mount. And John comes over, he's like, "Hey, what's the matter, Jesus?" And he's like, "Well, I'm really struggling to come up with a good word." It's like so unbiblical. It almost is heresy, right? And I'm wondering now, so now did Jacob go, all right, so I have to bless Zebulun. Let's see what Zebulun's name means. Oh, to dwell, habitation. I'll say something about, of course not. That is not, I don't think this word came from Jacob. I don't think any of these words came from Jacob. I think they were funneled to Jacob. Now, he might have thought he was the originator, but clearly these were prophetic words coming from Father God. All right? So to see the meaning of a name spoken in the prophecy, that's just God. That's God. And we see this several times in these words, all right? But for the first one, Zebulun, I didn't actually write down the name of the word. Yeah.
So this is years before they were actually given the land. And the land testifies to his blessings also in a combination, because he's basically, for Issachar, he's telling him where his land is going to be. So.
And think about that.
Yeah.
Jacob's not the one who disperses them into the promised land. That happens later. No, Joshua and the elders. It's really a decision made by the tribes themselves, with Joshua as the head of the... I'm sorry? I can't hear you because you're not speaking to a microphone.
I thought they drew lots.
Okay, so they drew lots. Please use the microphone though, okay? All right, Issachar. So Issachar is a strong donkey. The name Issachar means reward and recompense. Crouching between the sheepfolds. He saw that the resting place was good and that the land was pleasant, so he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant at forced labor. So this tribe will be known for its ability to do hard labor. They become and are an industrious, robust, hardy, and stalwart tribe. And they live up to the name of their founder, whose name means man of wages. All right? The New International Commentary of the New Testament says about them regarding verse 15. He saw that a resting place was good and that the land was pleasant, so he bowed his shoulder to the bear and became a servant at forced labor. The prevailing view, this is New International Commentary of the Old Testament, the prevailing view is that Jacob paints Issachar as a group of people who put creaturely comforts ahead of any other value, and as a result, it costs them their independence. All right? Because the people that they become forced laborers for are not Jews. They're the neighboring tribes that they didn't eradicate. All right? So, let me see this here. So regarding creaturely comforts, that's A and B, he saw that a resting place was good. Right? That speaks of creaturely comforts. We want to find a place we can be comfortable. It ain't going to be too hard. You know what I mean? Where we can just have if we work hard, we can have our comfort. There's plenty of resources around that we could live a good life, you know? And that's kind of their focus. So whatever it takes to get that, that's what we're shooting for. And that's where they end up in trouble and the land was pleasant, right? Again, speaking of comfort, and then here it goes. So he bowed his shoulder to bear and became a servant at forced labor. The tribe of Issachar became servant slaves to the local Canaanites ruling in the Jezreel Valley nearby. All right? This sin is as old as Adam and Eve. The woman saw that the tree was good for food, and the Issacharites saw that a resting place was good for rest and comfort. I just need to change something here real fast.
Reminds me a lot.
How so?
When he had a choice of the valleys and he saw that.
Yep. It's interesting you're saying that, and I wish I would have thought of it, because a little later on, I draw again on Lot in a comparison. I just don't remember where or how. It might even be in the next chapter. I don't know. We'll see when we get there. All right? This theme suggests, this theme surfaces again in the Sodom and Gomorrah stories, where catering to lust became epidemic. All right, and that really would include what you're saying, because that truly is the beginning of the Sodom and Gomorrah stories, is Abraham and Lot separating, because that's where Lot goes, to Sodom, or outside of Sodom. But he's so close to Sodom that he goes to Sodom. Excuse me one second, I'm about to sneeze. It also appears in Jacob's brother Esau. Right? He puts the needs of his stomach ahead of the voice of his conscience, and he paid for it dearly. The herdsman of Lot, there we go, can identify with the choice of Issachar and his progeny. Their choice of land in Genesis 13, 10 through 11, brought them into close proximity to Sodom and Gomorrah. All right, and here's Genesis 13, 10 and 11. This is when Abraham and Lot are separating. And the reason why they're separating was because they had prospered so much that there wasn't adequate food supply for their flocks, for both of them. And there started to become animosities and hatreds between the workers, primarily, of Abraham and Lot. So they amicably went their ways. And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. And we know from the story of Lot how that worked out. All right? Next one is Dan, verses 16 to 18, which is a little longer than the other prophecies other than Joseph and Judah. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path that bites the horse's heels so that his rider falls backward. I wait for your salvation, O Lord. So Dan shall judge his people. Anyone want to take a stab at what the name Dan means? Exactly. That's what it means. Judge. Judge. John MacArthur says this: Dan fathered an aggressive tribe that would also judge in the nation, but would not be known for moral stature or religious faithfulness. All right, and the reference here is 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 28 and 29, which says, So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. And he said to the people, You have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. And he set one in Bethel, and the other one he put in Dan. All right? So Dan does not rise up and go, How dare you desecrate the Lord our God? We only worship in Jerusalem. They were like, Hey, okay, we'll take a calf. And what's interesting about this, you have to understand something about idol worship. The normative idol worship that you see in the Old Testament that occurs with the Jews is not a complete forsaking of the Lord. It is a mixing of pagan practices and doctrines into the Judaism they received from the Lord, into the Mosaic laws. Okay? Perfect example is what I just read to you. When when Judah and Israel became two kingdoms, Israel split into two, so it was Judah and Israel. Northern kingdom's Israel, southern kingdom's Judah. Jerusalem's almost at the northernmost border. So they weren't far from Dan and Beersheba and Bethel. But they were enemies. So I don't know why they do this, but they form a cow. And guess what the cow's name is? Yahweh. It's the same cow that comes up again in Exodus. It's the same idolatrous desires that causes Israel to go to God, and rather than saying, God, we really want to have a king over us. So if it's your will, O Lord, would you please pick a king for us? That would have been an honest request. He could have said yes, he could have said no. Instead, they went, oh king, oh Lord, we want a king like all the other nations. So what did God do? He gave them a king just like all the other nations. And he turned out to be a train wreck because he wasn't God's choice. He was God's choice. God said Saul, but it was more of a corrective disciplinary judgment lesson than it was a blessing from God because they asked in the right way. Nancy.
It's the same idolatry that we see now where somebody will say, well, my God would never do this or that. You know, they form a God in their own image or in the image they want it to be. And they worship them as the God of creation when the God of creation is in the Bible, and they come against that. But instead, they, oh, my God would never not like homosexuality, or my God would never judge, or my God would never do send somebody to hell.
Right.
So they're creating a God in the image they want.
And calling him Jesus. And calling it Jesus. Yahweh
right,
and Holy Spirit. Yep. Same thing, the most obvious modern example for me is the Roman Catholic Church, who, again, you're talking about a pagan land that becomes Christianized. This is way back when. Did not start out idolatrous. But given time, they started adopting things that the Old Testament clearly shows us God does not want us to do. Right? The biggest example of making images of God, making images of Jesus, making any images at all, whether it be Joseph, Mary, Jesus, any of the saints, and bowing down before them and praying to them, which they do. As well as, and the ones who do it even more flagrantly are the splinters off of the Roman Catholic Church known as the Eastern Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, Greek Orthodox churches. Those were the three splinters, and Russian Orthodox. I don't know if I said them. They were a splinter off of Roman Catholicism, no less than our Protestant faith is a splinter off of Roman Catholicism. Because these people saw bad things happening that weren't biblical and split. Now, these Orthodox churches, you go to their churches, and you will see people kissing things and, putting hands on things and trying to get the blessing from them. And, it's just crazy.
I just want to say I thought something was interesting that came to me some time ago. I believe it was the Romans who had the god Zeus, right?
Yes, well, Greek.
Greek, okay. Well, Jesus, as we know, actually is pronounced Jesus. Mm-hmm. And to have them have their head god as Zeus, it just strikes me very strange that...
I don't know that you should read anything into that because, Jesus, now you have to get into all the transliterations of the name Jesus, which did not start out as Jesus. Started out as Yeshua in the Hebrew, which sounds nothing like Zeus. In the Greek, it was Iesus, Iesus, which I guess you could say kind of has a similarity to it, but I don't think that Zeus was fashioned after Jesus. And I think Zeus was a false god before Jesus as well. So, but there is certainly a phonetic similarity. Anyone else? So Dan would later abandon its land allotment. That's in Joshua chapter 19, verses 40 to 48. And they would migrate to the extreme north of Israel in Judges 18. Jacob's closing cry expressed hope for Dan in the day when salvation would indeed come to Israel. Dan, however, is omitted in the list of tribes in Revelation 7, 4 through 8. Even though the number of the sealed, 144,000, divided by 12,000 for each tribe, would equal 12 tribes. For some reason, though, Dan isn't mentioned by name. In other words, what I'm saying to you is that Dan is mentioned in Revelation chapter 7, verses 4 through 8. But whereas God names the tribes, he omits the name Dan. And it's probably not because of any virtuous reason. All right? Verse 16, Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. A judge means to plead the cause, to defend, but it doesn't mean to condemn. All right, in this usage. Hence, Genesis 49:16 needs to be read as a statement of praise directed at Dan. This is a positive for Dan and not a negative. All right, so Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel is a attaboy for Dan, okay? Verse 17, Dan shall be a serpent in the way, a viper by the path. Okay, so what does that mean? Dan is compared to a serpent or viper who lunges at and bites the hooves of passing horses, causing the horse to bolt and throw its rider. And obviously, we've already run across serpent symbolism in Genesis. The New International Commentary of the Old Testament says this about this verse. The imagery in this verse seems to suggest that Dan, although small, will be quite capable of holding his own. His strength will be greater than his size. As small as he is, he will be able to strike panic into an animal as large as a horse, which speaks of groups larger than them. All right? So they'll be a strong little tribe. And then finally in verse 18, almost randomly, it says, I wait for your salvation, O Lord. And I'm like, okay, so is this applied to Dan? Or does it not apply to Dan? Yet it's in the same context as the blessing on Dan. It is only in connection with the oracle to Dan that one finds the sentiments expressed in this verse. So the old New International Commentary connects this to Dan. Okay? Here we see a statement of trust directed toward Yahweh, and the only time Yahweh is addressed in all of these oracles to all the children. All right? The New International Commentary also says this: few consider the statement to be genuinely Jacob's. Isn't that interesting? All right? So most of the commentators believe this was added. But if it is a ringing testimony by the elderly patriarch to his renewed faith in God. In other words, if these are the words of Jacob, then he's making a statement of faith in God that he shall one day be delivered by his God and experience eternal salvation. Because I wait for your salvation, O Lord, has nothing to do with physicality. Has everything to do with the spiritual. It's really a statement, because who is God's salvation? Jesus. It's a statement of faith. It's a statement of messianic faith. Even though it's a very simple statement, doesn't mention the Messiah by name, Messiah, right? Yet that's exactly what it is, because Jesus is salvation. Now, let me check out something here now that I'm saying that. Thy salvation. Okay. In the Old Testament, when you see the word salvation, you know what that word is in Hebrew? Yeshua. It's the name of Jesus. Isn't that cool? It means in Hebrew something saved, that is deliverance, victory, prosperity. All right, now if I click on this and go to the more in-depth dictionary, a feminine noun meaning salvation, deliverance, help, and victory and prosperity. The primary meaning is to rescue from distress or danger. It is used to signify help given by other human beings. I mean, this is a messianic statement. I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord. Rich.
Did you say that was a Hebrew word?
Yeah, the Hebrew word here is Yeshua. Huh? Yeshua. Yeshua is the name of Jesus, the original name in Hebrew. So in other words, they could very well be saying, I've waited for Yeshua, O Lord. I've waited for Jesus, O Lord. Now, Jesus has not manifested yet, so it could very well also mean, I am waiting. I await Jesus, O Lord. That's pretty cool, isn't it? Now, does Jacob know that's what he's saying? I doubt it. I don't know. I mean, he's making a statement that he's waiting, that he's awaiting salvation. And that's certainly connected to the coming Messiah. But he doesn't know that the name of the Messiah is literally going to be Yeshua. Isn't that cool? I don't know. This stuff excites me. All right. So now we move on to Gad. Verse 19. Raiders shall raid Gad, but he shall raid at their heels. Gad, the meaning of the name is a band or a troop, i.e. raiders. That's who raid, troops, militia, right? Once again, we see the play on words and prophetic nature of Jacob's words to his son. So, to paraphrase verse 19, it could read, the troop shall be raided by troops. Right? Raiders shall raid Gad. Troops shall raid the troop. The area which Gad eventually settles in is located on the eastern border of Israel. Okay? That means, if it's on the eastern border, that means that to its west, to the left, towards the Mediterranean Sea, are all tribes of Israel. So, friends. To the right, to the west, is Canaan, that I don't know if you'd call it Canaan. But anyway, non-Jews, other tribes, and potential enemies. So in other words, what I'm saying is they have an open border to attack. They don't, it's like if you're a tribe that's in the middle of Israel, well, if enemies want to get to you, they got to go through another tribe first. In other words, it'll buy you time because somebody else is being attacked. So everyone's going to be made aware. If you're on the border and you get attacked, it's a surprise. You see what I'm saying? All right. So it's a less secure position. All right, so it's located on the eastern border of Israel. That location made them more susceptible to invasions and attacks by the Ammonites specifically and other desert marauders. And this is in Judges 11 and 12 where this stuff happens. As they were open on one side, not surrounded by other tribes. I'd also point out that all these enemies that we're talking about were supposed to be utterly annihilated when Israel took the promised land. So these are all consequences of Israel not being completely obedient to the word of God and seeking to satisfy the lusts of the flesh, which is what they were doing. Now, them seeking to satisfy the lusts of the flesh when it came to the conquest of Canaan materialized, it manifested as them going, wow, let's keep that stuff. That stuff's, we can use 1,000 more cattle. Or let's take all their wealth. Or let's take some of their strong young men to be laborers, slaves. All right? Or let's not completely annihilate them. Let's leave them a little for posterity. Or any excuse you can come up with. Charitable, loving, greedy, selfish. All these were reasons used not to obey God. And so there's a price attached to that. Rich.
I wonder if Samaria is part of Gad, because that sounds like everything they endured. The Samaritans, they were even hated by their own people.
Ancient Samaria map. Judea. Now I want to see if I can get it with, because Samaria is in Israel. Well, I knew that already. All right, let me just see. I want to try to see if I can answer this. So it's east of the Decapolis. All right, now let me open up another one. Israel map by tribe. And there it is. I don't like that map. Okay. Now let me go back to my other map just real fast. Where's ancient Samaria? There we go. Decapolis, Perea, Judea, Arimathea. I can't find. No, it looks like Dan is all. Oh wait, who are we talking about here?
Samaria and
Gad. No, Gad is. I should have known that right away. Gad is to the west of the Jordan River, and Samaria is to the east of the Jordan River. I was trying to find out specifically what tribes. Well, I know it's not Judah, so it was probably the land of Ephraim and Benjamin that became Samaria. That would be my guess, because I know that Samaria bordered on Judah. Okay, let me go back to where I was. Or the tribes. All right, so the New Living Translation of this entire verse, verse 19, says this. This is in modern English for you guys and me in our kind of language. Gad will be attacked by marauding bands, but he will attack them when they retreat. Okay, so the commentary says this, New International Commentary. In the Song of Deborah in Judges 5:17, those of Gilead, which is Gad, are rebuked for remaining on their side of the Jordan, conceivably because they were preoccupied with their own problems at the time and not coming to the assistance of the tribes on the west side of the Jordan. All right, so that's not a good thing. All right, Asher, verse 20. Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield royal delicacies. I found this to be the most lighthearted and almost comedic of all the words, that they were going to be like cooks in the kitchen and, talking about their dainty morsels and stuff like that. Asher literally means rich and happiness. So the name fits the prophecy, doesn't it? So this isn't really a bad thing. Even if it's limited in scope, it's good news for Asher. The name fits the prophecy, which one could surmise tells him that this tribe shall be happy in their provision from God and where they end up in the promised land. It speaks of an agricultural bounty. The land they eventually occupy is very fertile, allowing for this bounty. All right, so you have fertile land, you're going to have crops, and you're going to have livestock. What else could you hope for? Even if you're not, let me go back to my ancient maps here. I kept that up. Let me see where Asher is. Ancient, naturally I got rid of it. Ancient tribes of Israel map. Okay. And we're talking about Asher. Asher's food shall be rich, and he shall yield. So, okay. Not only do they have beautiful land, but they border the ocean. So their provision is, when it comes to food, Asher has everything. They are not lacking in anything. All right? So located on the northeastern coast of Israel, Asher also is in the maritime business, the ocean-going business, by which it also prospers with bounty from the sea. Judges 5:17. This is speaking about Gad. Gilead stayed beyond the Jordan, and Dan, why did he stay with the ships? Asher sat still at the coast of the sea, staying by his landings. So in the negative, Judges 1, verses 31 and 32 speaks of Asher as dwelling among the Canaanites. Not good. Here's what it says. Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Acco, or the inhabitants of Sidon, or of Elab, or of Aksib, or of Helba, or of Aphik, or of Rehob. So the Asherites lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. When we consider the conquest of the promised land, none of those tribes are mentioned. They're like small players. When they go into the promised land and God commands them to kill the inhabitants of the land, he targets the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, all these larger tribes. But they weren't the only people there. And this is an example that there were many other peoples that lived. And being that they lived in such close proximity in this land that would become Asher's, it would be fair to assume they're all related. Whether it goes back 1 generation, 3 generations, 5 generations, or 20 generations, they're all related. And when you think about it, they're all related. Because they all came from the descendants of Noah. Right? And if you think about it, we're all related. Because Abraham was a pagan. As are all of us. So we all go back to Adam and Eve. So when you can isolate people groups, but the further back you go, the less the walls break down, and we all end up being one people of many different races because of time and geography. So negatively speaking, Asher may have catered to Canaanite royalty, not Israelite, yoking themselves unequally with unbelieving pagans against the command of God when they were going to enter Canaan in conquest. Now let's be practical. Let's think about this. Everyone's going in, they're taking their land, right? Asher's got their land, and they go and they're to conquest. And they get in there, and before they see anybody, they're looking at the land, like, man, this is great. We got the ocean over here, we got the land over here, and there's some mountains over there, and it's all there's rivers. This is perfect. And then they start running across these other people. And they think to themselves, I think there's enough land here for everyone. Why should we kill these people? What's the answer to that question? Exactly. So if God said it, it must have been for a good reason. And the reason is idol worship. Okay? So just very interesting. And I guess if there's a lesson here, I would say that this is the concern and temptation regarding money and prosperity, that it causes compromise. Because, when you are in a position where it's life and death, and you have certain things that have to be done to maintain life in that scenario, you will be far less apt to deviate than when all of a sudden the bounty's great and the money's coming in and the bank account's filled and, it's like, it's not so bad, You see what I'm saying? So as much, and now I have something really, close to me to compare to, and that would be my millionaire nephew, who had it had to have been, man, I couldn't even guess. It had to at least been $7 or $8 million he just spent building a mansion out in the Hamptons. And, always traveling to Paris and London, he does all the international. And, and I'm like, man, I wish I could travel, But what if I was given prosperity like that? I know me. I have the answer to that question. If I was given unlimited funds, I'd be dead. I'd be dead. Because I don't know that I'd be strong enough to resist the temptations of the partying and the women and the drugs. I have to believe that God intentionally did not give me this. So there must have been a good reason, right? Anyway. Moving on, verse 21, Naphtali. Naphtali is a doe let loose that bears beautiful fawns. Clearly not a warring tribe, right? We don't read anything about conquest here. What we're reading about is a people who are probably on the more, they're not a strong tribe with might, with strength. They're maybe leaned a little bit pacifistically. That's the doe illusion that's being alluded to. And that they reproduce. They're a nice people. They bear beautiful fawns. All right? Let's see what it says. I'm probably completely off. All right? Naphtali, that struggles or fights. That's what the name means, Naphtali. And then we have a doe let loose. And that was a confusion for me. Let me go back to Hitchcock. That struggles or fights. Easton Bible names. My wrestlings. My fifth son. All right? And that's based on what Bilhah said when she birthed him. And yet, they translate the name Naphtali as, in this prophecy, a doe let loose. It kind of doesn't make sense. I don't know if I got an answer for that. Here's what MacArthur had to say. Deer-like speed and agility marked Naphtali's prowess. All right, so they had him at military, but what they were known for was their mobility. The song of Deborah and Barak, who hailed from Naphtali, in Judges 4:6, is representative of his eloquent words. I'm going to read Judges 4:6. And this is about Deborah. She sent and summoned Barak the son of Abinoam from Kadesh Naphtali and said to him, has not the Lord, the God of Israel, commanded you, go gather your men at Mount Tabor, taking 10,000 from the people of Naphtali and the people of Zebulun? All right, so the verse is difficult to translate. That's one of the things the commentators agreed on. And because of that, I was given numerous interpretations of this verse, which doesn't help us necessarily to get a straight answer, but who says you always have to have a straight answer? Right? So let's take a look at these 6 interpretations. And these are based on both commentators and different translations, how different interpreters and translated different versions of the Bible. All right, so the first one comes from Spicer, Dahoud, and O'Connor, Naphtali is the one reflected above instead of a doe let loose. Naphtali is the one reflected above. Second, this is the New English Bible translation. Naphtali is a spreading terebinth, putting forth lovely boughs. A terebinth is a tree. Putting forth lovely boughs. Third, this is from a man named Albright. Naphtali is a racing stag which bellows with trumpet notes. All right, that one I think is really off the wall, but what do I know? That's probably the accurate translation, right? Barnes says this: Naphtali is a hind let loose, giving forth sweet songs of freedom. Fifth, a man named Anderson. Naphtali, a hind is released. A hind is a deer. Sheep of the fold are sold. Gervitz, Naphtali, a mountain ewe was born who gives birth to lambs of the fold. All right, so 6 different translations. Question is, why are there 6 different translations? And the reason is because they're taking these translations from a multitude of codexes, a multitude of parchments, of fragments, to make their translations. And these fragments are ancient. So there might be a blur here, so they're not sure, because in the Hebrew, if you ever saw the Hebrew, there's like lines and slashes everywhere. And the difference between one word and another could be one letter, one slash not being there. And so you get various translations, all right? So the point being that as a doe let loose, and we looked at the other scriptures about them being a mobile tribe, that is what a doe let loose, regardless of the translation, seems to be pointing towards, is their fleet-footedness as a people in their army, all right? And that they bear beautiful fawns. They multiply. What is that coming from? Oh. Naphtali is located on the eastern border with Asher in North Israel. Remember, Asher was by the sea? So you have the ocean, Mediterranean Sea. Come onto land, you have Asher, then you have Naphtali bordering them. All right? They have an open border to their east, though, into Canaan. The New International Commentary says this about Naphtali, that they are a tribe of which little is known. All right? They are praised in Judges 4:6, Judges 4:10, Judges 5:18 for its respectable brotherly cooperation with Deborah in her tribe's fight with the Canaanites, against the Canaanites. He was willing to abandon the safety of his own highlands in this hilly, wooded Galilean country in support of a vulnerable brother. So, nothing bad to say about Naphtali. And they really are a moral, ethical, loyal people. To the best of our knowledge, this is one of the few areas of Canaan that show no signs of Canaanite occupation. That's interesting. We're talking about archaeology here. We're talking about the archaeological record in documents and also in actual digs in that area, that they haven't found any Canaanite settlements. Okay? So it probably was an open land at the time when they came in. So this reference puts the tribe of Naphtali in a good light and would suggest that Jacob's words to Naphtali hints at the tribe's abilities in fighting. But that does not mean this tribe won every battle they fought. It simply means they were noted for their speed. And now we get to the next major one, Joseph. Starting in verse 22. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring. His branches run over the wall. All right, so what's a bough? Guys got to learn to use the microphones. No one's using a microphone.
It's like a not a valley, like where water goes into. Like, I don't know if I'm right. I don't know if it's like, I heard. Is that what it was, brother?
I'm glad I looked this up. I don't even know why they call it a bow, quite honestly.
Isn't it a branch of a tree?
It is. That's why I'm thinking
Like
I'm thinking the problem is here, and
Like
I
a
highlighted
Christmas
bow.
tree, it's
No, you're
the
gonna.
boughs.
Okay, here we go. All right, cool. I don't like this translation. Now I can go to the King James, and it says bow. I can go to, let me see, I already did English Standard. I can go to the New American Standard, and it's Joseph is a fruitful branch. Here's the problem. The word it's being translated from is the word Ben. And Ben is a son. That's a son. Simon, Ben Joseph, something like that. Simon, the son of Joseph. That would be used as that. So, the English Standard Translation says Joseph is a fruitful branch. Joseph is a fruitful bough by a spring, his branches run over the wall. The New Living Translation says Joseph is the foal of a wild donkey, the foal of a wild donkey at a spring, one of the wild donkeys on the ridge. The Young's Literal Translation says, and this is the one that I probably would agree with, Joseph is a fruitful son by a fountain. Daughters step over the wall. All right? And so, of these three, again, what probably happened is what I'm saying is you have one variation in the Hebrew that's not clear. They're unsure if it could be this, it could be that. And so the different translators went in different directions. And I don't count that as a negative, guys. I think, why is it confusing? Because you refuse to study? You see what I'm saying? See, I see it as an opportunity. Nancy.
It made me think, when you said that about being a branch or whatever, it made me think of Isaiah 53:2, which was a prophecy, I think, about Jesus. But he shall grow up before him as a branch, as a root out of dry ground.
Right.
He hath neither form nor beauty. When we shall see him, there shall be no form that we should desire him. But that word branch, that's what, I just found that interesting.
I was just talking to you about this. One of the principles of early Jewish Christianity, because I'm doing a lot of study right now on this, is these guys, you have to understand, the Septuagint was written before the New Testament scriptures, the letters. The Septuagint is the Greek translation of the Hebrew text of the Old Testament. That's the Septuagint. So the Septuagint is an ancient Greek Old Testament translation. Why would they do that? Why did we need a Septuagint? Because people outside of Israel were interested or became proselytes to Judaism, but they didn't speak Hebrew. So the Septuagint is a Greek translation of the Hebrew for the Gentile the Gentile proselytes who would come to Judaism, to faith in Judaism, back in the days before Christ. But then Christ came. And you see all these fulfillments. So a lot of times what would happen is the Jewish Christians would read the Old Testament, and this may or may not be an accurate explanation for why we have this discrepancy here, but it fits. So I'm going to use it as an example. Joseph is a fruitful branch is literally in the Hebrew, Joseph is a fruitful son. But because in the New Testament it's spoken that Messiah is the branch, that's the fulfillment of that even though it says Ben in the Hebrew, that they might have changed the translation to branch to fit, to say that this is pointing to Christ. Because that happened a lot, I'm finding out as I'm reading about the history of the church. That the Jewish Christian translators would take the Old Testament and they would literally write commentaries called targums on these things and then explain that this is Jesus. Jesus is the branch. You know? But anyway, I think probably the most correct rendering is Joseph is a fruitful son by a fountain, daughters step over the wall. The confusion comes from how one starts in defining the word we have as bow. The Hebrew word ben can mean and is often translated as son. However, it is also used often metaphorically, right, as a symbol, a picture, an allusion, alluding to something, as it is in the English Standard Version and the New Living Translation. Regardless of how you interpret verse 22, the meaning remains the same. And here's the paraphrase of what this is saying. The tribe of Joseph will prosper. It will be fed everything it needs to prosper, and this tribe will prosper to overflowing. That's literally what they're, paraphrasingly, what they're saying, okay? Verse 23 and 24, the archers provoked him and shot at him and were hostile towards him. But his bow remained firm and his arms were agile. From the hands of the mighty one of Jacob, from there is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Now, this could mean one of two things. I think it means the latter of what I'm about to say to you. But the former, it sure fits pretty darn close. The first way of looking at it is towards Joseph the man. Not the tribe, not his posterity, but what has already transpired in the life of Joseph. If we look at it that way, verse 23, who are the archers? Huh? His brothers. His brothers are the archers. They're the ones who provoked him. They shot at him. They were hostile towards him. But his bow remained firm. What does that mean? His arms were agile. He remained faithful. He trusted God. Above all that was happening to him, his main question wasn't, why is this happening to me? His main question was, what is God doing? How is God going to use this? Which is sure a good lesson for us. Because we tend to be our flesh is a half full kind of flesh when it comes to the things of faith. You see what I'm saying? We always in the flesh naturally go, oh, woe is me, why? Right? But we aren't called to that, are we? We're called to go, Lord, I don't like this. I don't want this. I'm just being honest. So I know that you will use all things for the good of those who are called according to your purposes, Romans 8:28. So what is it you're doing? And I'm going to walk through this terrible, horrible thing I'm going through, whether it's a permanent condition, whether it's a physical impairment, or just a valley you're walking through in life, depression, anxiety, the car broke down, you don't have the money, the rent's due, you don't have the money, I'm going to walk through this in faith and see what it is you're doing. And in this way, glorify your name in this trial. All right? That's the first way we could look at this. I don't actually think that's the primary way of looking at this. Here's the latter, because all of these words are speaking of posterity, whether it's to Zebulun, Asher, Dan, Jacob, Judah. It's talking about what's going to come of this tribe in the coming days. So I think we have to apply the same principle to Joseph here. It is more applicable to the tribes of Joseph's two sons, because that's who the tribes of Joseph are going to come from, Ephraim and Manasseh. Samuel, the prophet, comes from Ephraim. Gideon comes from Manasseh. All right? So now when I look at this verse 22, I go, Joseph is a fruitful branch. Prophets will come from him. Right? A fruitful branch by a spring. Joseph's tribe will naturally put forth men of God who will prophesy or lead. Okay? Now, Messiah is not coming from Joseph, but that doesn't matter. There's plenty of Christ typology in Joseph and blessing from Joseph's faith as a Christ type manifest in the Old Testament. Okay? So Samuel was from Ephraim and Gideon was from Manasseh. Samuel, just for summary's sake, Samuel was a prophet of God during the time of Eli, the high priest. He was given to Eli. He was raised in the temple. Eli and his 2 sons were corrupt, but Samuel was not. Eli and his 2 sons were judged, and they all died. And Samuel became the high priest. Samuel became the main religious confidant and counselor of King Saul. Samuel is the one who prophesied the demise of King Saul, that God is yanking the kingdom away from him. All right? So Samuel never compromised. Samuel, from beginning to end, remains a man of faith. Samuel dies, and later on, Saul goes to see a witch and conjures Samuel from Abraham's bosom, from where Shul is where it says. What's Samuel's first words to Saul? He rebukes him. How dare you? I'm dead, and you're still rebelling against the commands of God by summoning me from the dead. You moron. He doesn't say that. All right. Stu nods. All right. So in these 2 verses, we're told of Joseph, the individual's wavering faith in the mighty one of Jacob. In verse 24. Despite the brutal actions, this is still verse 24, taken against him by his brothers, Joseph never retaliated. He was always able to see past the evil decisions and actions of men, past that to the providence and sovereignty of God and his will being accomplished through sinful men. And that's what we're called to do, brothers and sisters. In every circumstance. You know, and it's one thing when bad things are happening to you that don't involve other people. That's bad enough. But when the bad things happen to you at the hands of other people who have gossiped against you, abused you, whatever the allegation is, Joseph is our example. He was still able to look past. The worst thing you can ever do in life is to get stuck on an offense and not look past to see what God is doing. You see, it's only in being able to see the providence of God, even in the abuses that happen to you, that opens the door to your being able to forgive others of their offenses against you. Do you see that? So forgiveness is really a big part of being a Christian. We are not allowed to hold resentments. Now, that doesn't mean we're not allowed to discipline or hold people accountable. But we're not allowed to hold on to offense, or I could even fairly say to retaliate. Because to retaliate is a connotation of getting revenge. All right? Whereas discipline is not. I can discipline someone for doing something that was wrong without having a spirit of bitterness and resentment and unforgiveness. You see? Jesus did that so well. And he told us, be angry, yet sin not, and sin not. All right? How do you sin when you're angry? You retaliate, whether you're holding on to a silent offense or a manifested offense that you attack back. We're not called to do that. And it's probably one of the hardest things that we have to put down in our lives, is the desire to get revenge. Ken, remember speaking to the mic, okay?
As is written, revenge is mine, said the Lord, I will repay.
Right. That is true. It doesn't mean you can't discipline. It doesn't mean you can't even confront somebody and hold them to account for what they said. It's just that when we do these things, we're trying to do them to get unity, to restore the fellowship. You see, it's a difference. Yeah.
Is there a difference in? I don't think retaliation matters in any aspect, but is there a difference in your reaction to a brother as opposed to a non-believer? Because you did mention about incurring unity, that speaks to a fellow brother.
Well, yes is the answer to that question. I would say it's both similar and dissimilar at the same time. It's similar because in the Old Testament, we're told eye for an eye, tooth for tooth. But in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, look, if somebody takes your cloak,
Give him your tunic too.
right, or if he slaps you on the face, give him the other cheek, And that's not applied specifically to your brother like the church. It's like, we're not called to be a retaliatory people. But how we're going to confront that with them is certainly going to look different because, presumably a brother or sister you deal with will be open to hearing what the scriptures have to say. An unbeliever generally will not. All right? So, at some point you're going to have to, probably a sooner point, you're going to have to walk away saying, look, we agree to disagree. And if that means that we can't really fellowship anymore because it's that big a thing, the most important thing has to be in your heart, to not hold animosities and resentments towards anyone. There is not a single scenario where you're holding on, a person, a believer, holding on to an offense is beneficial. None.
There is a way you can retaliate if you go by according to God's word. If he's hungry and thirsty, feed him, give him something to drink. If he's burning coals on his head, that's how you retaliate.
Yeah, that's right.
Feed him and give him something.
Did everybody hear that? That's kind of important. I'm going to pull it up. No, that's fine. It's a good point. I want to elaborate on it. Burning coals. The exact phrase. I'll go with the King James because it's probably the best odds of. Nope, can't find it. Heap burning coals verse. Proverbs 25:22. This is how I do Bible studies, in case you're ever wondering. I have a problem, I do a Google search. It's better than any Bible program you could ever do. Proverbs 25:22. Well, it's quoted in the New Testament, but this is where it comes from. Proverbs 25. And I'm going to interpret it for you through the New Testament, all right? If your enemy is hungry, give him food to eat, and if he is thirsty, give him water to drink, for you will heap burning coals on his head, and the Lord will reward you. All right, now, burning coals are not used in a positive way. All right, burning coals are speaking about like judgment and a negative consequence, all right? And I'm thinking, what is the negative consequence of feeding your enemy and giving him water to drink? Well, if you do it in the name of Jesus, you're going to anger them. They're going to feel guilty. In other words, what you are doing is establishing further their criminal record before the throne of judgment. All right? Because in the end, the culmination of that will be condemnation to hell. Okay? So that's my take on it on a grand scheme. His arms were made agile by God. That is verse 24. From the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. And then verse 25. From the God of your father who helps you. By the Almighty who blesses you with blessings of heaven above. Blessings that of the deep that lies beneath, blessings of the breast and of the womb. The blessings of your father have surpassed the blessings of my ancestors. He's got a lot to say about for Joseph. I was reading the wrong translation, but that's okay. I was reading from the New American Standard. Okay, so let's take it bit by bit. His arms were made agile by God, verse 24. God is here declaring both his being the source of Joseph's strength, while at the same time acknowledging Joseph's faithfulness despite how things looked for so long. In 24 and 25, no other tribe had such direct reference to the Lord God in their blessings as addressed to Joseph. God is addressed using 5 names, 5 titles. The first one, the mighty one of Jacob, verse 24. Second, the shepherd, verse 24. The stone of Israel, verse 24. The God of your father, verse 25. The Almighty, verse 25. All right? So taking each one individually, see, each one is addressing a different attribute of who God was for Joseph. All right? That's the point. First one, the mighty one of Jacob, speaks of strength. God was Joseph's strength. The shepherd, tenderness. God was tender with Joseph. Now, reading his story, you may not get the same conclusion, but that's what Joseph's conclusion is. Well, that's God's conclusion for Joseph. The stone of Israel speaks of firmness, stability, and immutability. What does the word immutable mean? Unchanging. In other words, Joseph was able to count on God's word to him, regardless of what else was going on in his life that contradicted God's word to him. All right? The God of your father speaks of God as the personal God, the family God. The God of your father, speaking of intimacy and trust or faithfulness. And then finally, the Almighty, undefeatable, supreme in power in all ways. And these are the ways that Joseph looked to God. So these names and repetitive usages of the names of God here speak of the sovereignty of God, that regardless of what misfortunes Joseph encountered, God was there to accomplish his sovereign will through his providence. All right? And just so we remember, because I want to pound these terms into you, because they're probably all new to you. Sovereignty is his almighty character above all things. He is over all. He cannot be defeated. Providence is his accomplishing his will through the decisions of sinful man. So it was God's providence that Jesus was born of the tribe of Judah. And that counts all the sinful actions of Joseph's brothers against Joseph. It encompasses the decisions of all the people along Joseph's path of prison, of slavery and prison and working in Pharaoh's palace, how he got there. All of these decisions, because that's all these things are a multitude of personal decisions by fallen men that bring about Messiah. That's how mighty God is, right? And so if he can do that through sinful men, my brothers and sisters, who are yet imperfect and flawed and still sin. Do you think for 1 second that can prevent God from both sanctifying you and glorifying you? No. He is sovereign. So even your sinful decisions are being factored in to your glorification. Remember Romans 8:29 and 30? He who foreknew, he also called, he justified, he glorified, you know. I butchered it, but you get the point. So in verses 24, 25, and 26, Joseph says some pretty intense things to, Jacob says some pretty intense things to Joseph. Could Jacob make these statements to Joseph based solely upon the events of his life, which led him finally into Pharaoh's courts? No. Because that's past. These things are all about future. If we see with physical eyes only, we see in Joseph's life a multitude of troubles, tribulations, persecutions. But we also have seen up to this point how all of those troubles, trials, and persecutions led to God's will being fulfilled through Joseph in being able to save Israel and bring them into Egypt to live in an incubator named Goshen, isolated from the pagan culture surrounding them, so that they would leave 400 years later through slavery and redemption to get baptized in the Red Sea and exit the Red Sea as Israel, the nation, people of God. And yet we still go, my car broke down. Woe is me. Right? I mean, wretch that I am. Who will deliver me from this body of sin? Jesus Christ, my Lord. Amen? I mean, when you think about what it means to be perfect, I mean, that means that if you did everything right, you never sinned, and then one night you forgot to brush your teeth before bed. I mean, if we're going to take it down to the, boil it down to its, you break one law, you've broken all the law. I did not care for my body. It's the temple of God. And that's the futility of trying to obey your way into heaven. We want to obey because of what he did for us, and we certainly mourn when we sin. But you will die a sinner. May you ever lean into his grace and never start looking at yourself as meritorious because of the growth that you have in Jesus Christ. Amen? All right, let's wrap this up. So then Jacob invokes the blessings of the former patriarchs of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob onto Joseph. May the blessings of Jacob here for Joseph be greater than those bestowed upon Jacob. That's what he means when he says that. May the blessings that I've experienced be nothing compared to the blessings you experience. And I've experienced blessings. Jacob was able to say that at the end of his life. I have been a blessed man. All right, and then who was set apart from his brothers. Okay, and that's in verse 26. May they, the blessings, be upon the head of Joseph and on the brow of him who was set apart from his brothers. All right, God's election. Now here, it's not in salvation, but in calling is being displayed. All right, he was separated from pre-birth from his brothers to be the one whom God would use to get Jacob and family, Israel, to Egypt to be formed into a nation. The word was set apart from is one word. It's the Hebrew word Nazir. And from that word comes the phrase Nazarite. It's not a person who lived in Nazareth. A Nazarite is a person who takes a vow and sets himself apart from the rest of normal lay Jewish society to become pure unto God. All right? In a very real way, we are Nazarites. All right? And so in repentance and discipleship, we put away, as Nazarites, we put away sin. At least that's what we're called to do, right? Nazarites are people who dedicate themselves to the service of God and desire to yield themselves to Him completely. I don't know about you, but that's me. That describes me. When I went out on my deck and gave myself to the Lord, that became my heart. I wanted to dedicate myself to the service of God and yield myself to Him completely. And that meant pouring myself out for others. Because Jesus came to seek and save the lost. Jesus came to pour Himself out as a drink offering, and so are we. Just not as Messiah, but as disciples of the Messiah. So regarding Joseph and his life, he was separated from God by God from inception. He was called to a specific person in birthing Israel. We do not share Joseph's specific calling. All right? Joseph was a Christ type, meant to be put into the scriptures as an example to us and to teach us about God and about Messiah and tons of other lessons about life, right? But we aren't Christ types like that. Joseph received specific blessings which we will not receive. And then here's the kicker. Really? I mean, is that really the case? 100%? And the answer to that's no. Because we may not be Joseph, but we are called and set apart by God, and we are called to shine the light of the gospel that God may use us to deliver the message through which He saves lost souls, the gospel. We may not be Christ types like Joseph was, but we are in fact called to imitate Christ. And we're destined to be progressively transformed in character into His image. So in a very real way, we are types of Christ in that our characters are imperfect or shadowed reflections of Him. And that's why we do good works. We're trying to be Christ types. Even though we're in flawed, sinful bodies, we're still trying to be Christ types. So when somebody says to you, how could you do that? You made a mistake. You can honestly say to them in love, look, I try to live my life as a Christian to reflect the ideals and doctrines of Jesus Christ, but I fall short. That is what grace is all about. I mean, that to me it's a big plus when witnessing to other people, when they bring up your imperfections. And then finally, we may not be receiving the specific blessings of Joseph, but we have been blessed. We are being blessed, even in the midst of our lives here and now, and we shall be blessed with resurrection to glory bodies and eternal life in the loving presence of our Father God for all of eternity. Amen?
Amen.
Amen. So we have much in common with Joseph, don't we? And then I want to finish, I'd really like to finish the patriarchs here. So I'm going to do Benjamin, and we're going to stay a little late tonight. Is that okay with everyone? Okay. So Benjamin, son of my right hand, is what that means. I'll try to go a little quicker. Benjamin shares just one sentence here. He's a ravenous wolf, in the morning devouring the prey, and at evening dividing the spoil. This seems a bit odd that Benjamin was not directly associated with any of the nefarious sins of his brothers in their criminal acts against Joseph so many years ago. And we really don't know much about Benjamin up to this point. We know that he was born after Joseph. We know that Joseph and Benjamin are full-blooded brothers. And we know that Benjamin became Jacob's favorite after Joseph died, quote unquote, and that Jacob at first refused to send Benjamin to Egypt. That's how much he was worried about losing Benjamin. The reason being because Joseph and Benjamin were the only two sons born of Rachel, who was Jacob's heart. All right? And Joseph loves Benjamin dearly. So Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. Jacob's last born receives Jacob's last word of blessing. He saved him for last. The animal metaphor chosen for Benjamin is not far off of the mark as an appropriate description of Benjamin's descendants and the tribe of Benjamin. In the morning devouring the prey and at evening dividing the spoil. Benjamin is pictured as a wolf who in the morning eats with his family, his den, right? Wolves live in dens. The food it caught and divided the previous evening. That's what that's saying. Both sections of this verse speak of the warlike nature of this small tribe, and they become known for the quality of their archers and rock throwers. They're called slingers. They're rock throwers. I was like, how primitive, you know? But it was in many ways. As well as their brazen self-defense of their own evil in Judges 19 and 20. In Judges 19 and 20, this man who's traveling with his concubine passes through the territory of Benjamin, and he meets a person who invites him to stay with him, and blah, 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 and the Benjamites find out. And they pull a Sodom. They go and they say, give us this man so that we might know him. And they refuse, and this man takes his concubine and throws him out to them, and they rape her. So she comes back, and he takes her. He's mad. Now, you won't understand this, and I don't really understand this. You know, he takes her and he kills her, and he cuts her body up into 12 pieces. And then he sends one piece to every tribe in Israel and says, look what Benjamin did to my concubine. Now, the point is simply that Benjamin's sins were being found out. I don't want to get into the whole, because this isn't a study on Judges, but I don't want to get into the whole thing of the guy cutting up his concubine, all right? So what ends up happening is in Judges chapter 20, I am in the right chapter, right? Yes. All of Israel goes to war against Benjamin, all right? So Benjamin did some pretty mean, nasty things, all right? Both Sauls in the Bible are from Benjamin. King Saul and Saul the Pharisee, who becomes Paul the Apostle, both of the tribe of Benjamin. As Moses approached his death in Deuteronomy 33, his final words regarding Benjamin were this, verse 12 of 33. Of Benjamin, Moses said, the beloved of the Lord dwells in safety. The high God surrounds him all the day long and dwells between his shoulders. All right, now, the phrase "and dwells between his shoulders," God's shoulders, speaks of protection, strength, all being bestowed on Benjamin by God. It's God's strength, God's protection, right? Benjamin's name means son of my right hand, which speaks of the right hand, authority, power, protection, might. All right, so we can see the name incorporated in. All right, and that's everything I have on Benjamin. So we're going to end off here, and next week we'll wrap up this chapter, and we will surely be getting into chapter 50 and finish up Genesis. I don't know if we'll finish next week, but we'll finish in the next 2 weeks. And that's it. Does anybody have any questions they'd like to ask or anything they want to say before we close off? Online as well? Do you have anything you'd like to add? Okay. Gail. Why don't you pray us out? Back from vacation. Did you get a tan, Gail? You actually do look like you got a little color, and so does Richard.
A little bit.
Yeah. There you go.
Father, we thank you for all that you are doing with us. And we thank you for all that we're learning about you, about your sovereignty, about your providence. Lord, help us to remember all this and help us to continue to study your word so that we may learn more and more. And Lord, bring us home safely tonight so that we can all get together again on Sunday for more worship and fellowship and learning more about you and about your beloved Son, in whose name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Good night, everybody.